The Civil Rights Movement from 1868 to 1968 by Janet Thompson. In writing the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson stated that all men are created equal. However, it wasn't until Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation that all men included slaves. With the start of the Civil War, the country became divided regarding where African Americans stood in society. In 1868, the first major support of African Americans in America came with the passage of the 14th Amendment. This amendment guaranteed all people born in the U.S. the right to be a citizen and be protected under the law. Although it did not give African Americans the right to vote, it did penalize states for excluding them from their basic right to vote. States could either allow African Americans the right to vote or limit the number of congressmen each state could elect in the House. The Civil Rights Movement took a step backwards with the Supreme Court case of Plessy v. Ferguson. Here, the Supreme Court gave states the right to create their own laws allowing segregation as long as the rights of each race were separate but equal. This started segregation to become legalized. Booker T. Washington was one of the first African Americans who encouraged education as skilled laborers for the way that blacks could rise up in their social status. Instead of focusing on the inequality blacks had during this time, he encouraged blacks to see themselves as a united group of people. The NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, was founded by W.E.B. Du Bois in 1909. It was created to help equalize the human race. The beliefs of this group were that every person born in America should have the exact same political, civil, and social right as every other person. He did not believe that Booker T. Washington's thoughts about segregation were adequate. Instead, Du Bois believed that the educated blacks must use their education to help with the inequality of the races. In Brown v. Board of Education, a victory for integration began. The Supreme Court ruled that in the field of education, separate but equal has no place, because the white and black schools were not equal. At the end of 1955, a very brave black lady named Rosa Parks sparked America into seeing how unfairly blacks were treated. Rosa refused to sit in the back of the bus, which started the Montgomery bus boycott. Over the next 10 years, the civil rights movement gained momentum that started with this one heroic act. At the beginning of 1960, numerous sit-ins occurred across the South with blacks peacefully protesting against segregation. They demonstrated at lunch counters, parks, pools, restaurants, bowling alleys, and libraries. James Meredith was the first black student allowed to attend the University of Mississippi in 1962. Violence erupted and the National Guard was sent by President Kennedy to restore order. There was even 24-hour protection for Meredith by federal marshals to make sure he was being treated equally. Meredith played a huge role in integration that he himself didn't even realize. Arguably the most influential civil rights leader of all time was Martin Luther King Jr. He was a Southern black Baptist preacher who demanded nonviolent change in society's thinking about integration. He was not afraid to speak out against racism. His leadership was vital to the success and momentum of the movement, and he was respected by leaders in the United States. Violence had happened in Birmingham where young people were attacked with water hoses, police sticks, and dogs was shown on national TV. This led the country into an uproar, and Martin Luther King Jr. reacted with his famous letter from Birmingham jail. His letter became famous with the quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." On August 28, 1963, over 250,000 black and white Americans marched into Washington, D.C., demanding equal rights for all people. Martin Luther King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech supported equality through nonviolent change. But 2 weeks later, a bomb exploded in Birmingham that killed 4 young black girls. The bomb exploded at the 16th Street Baptist Church, which was a regular meeting place for civil rights leaders. The country saw this horrific act, which led to the reaffirmation that segregation was still present. The 24th Amendment outlawed the poll tax, which simply meant you no longer had to pay to vote. This also gave Congress the power to enforce it. Overall, this helped to allow blacks voting rights. In 1964, President Johnson, with Martin Luther King at his side, signed into law the Civil Rights Act. This act prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. After the Civil Rights Act, the right to vote for African Americans was still not addressed. In the summer of 1964, also known as Freedom Summer, several civil rights groups organized black and white college students to register black voters in Mississippi. Those who were against equal voting rights murdered 25 blacks and 2 whites as a result of this. In March of 1965, Martin Luther King led a march from Selma to Montgomery protesting black people's right to vote in Alabama. Before reaching Montgomery, violence occurred against the peaceful protesters, which was once again seen on TV around the world. Because of the Selma March, President Johnson enacted the Voting Rights Act, which was quickly passed by Congress. This act finally gave blacks the opportunity to vote. Malcolm X was a civil rights leader who did not agree with Martin Luther King's nonviolent approach to change. He encouraged blacks to rely on themselves, which oftentimes created violence against whites. Black Power was a slogan created to encourage blacks to elect black officials and become more self-determined. Differences between whites and blacks were embraced and new phrases emerged, such as black is beautiful and Afro-American in the place of blacks. On April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated at a motel in Memphis, Tennessee. The civil rights movement came to a pause without a true leader for their movement. While the nation mourned, the country recognized that equality for all citizens was not completely achieved. Even today, his legacy continues.